Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Before I continue with the next section of the interview with Roger Wheeler, I thought I would follow up. Well, Anagarika Paul is not there, but never mind. The reference I mentioned yesterday about the use of language and the way that things are named differently and such like. I got the reference wrong yesterday. It wasn't the Potthapada Sutta, which is in the Digha Nikaya, but rather the sutta I was thinking of is the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, which is number 139 of the Majjhima Nikaya. And the particular passage, and I think it's really useful to know this, is where the Buddha is saying, in terms of communicating, you shouldn't insist on local language and you shouldn't override normal usage, so that you're aware that, okay, in this particular region, this is the language they use, or this is the familiar term, or this is the conventional speech, and being say, aware of using those particular words in a context. And he says, and how, bhikkhus, does there come to be insistence on local language and overriding of normal usage? Here, bhikkhus, in different localities, they call the same thing a dish, pati, a bowl, pata, a vessel, vita, a saucer, sirava, a pan, daropa, a pot, purna, a mug, khana, or a basin, pisila. So whatever they call it in such and such a locality, one speaks accordingly. But if one is firmly adhering, only this is correct and anything else is wrong, that's how there comes to be insistence on local language and overriding normal usage, saying, no, it's not a dish, it's a bowl, or it's not a saucer, it's a pot, and that sort of string of different terms that are used to refer to the same article, I think it's a very clear and helpful way that the Buddhists say, speaking about the use of language as a convention, and that you have to be aware that the way that you use a word is not the same as the way other people use a word. So when you say dish, somebody else might be thinking, what's that? Say, oh, you mean a pot? Oh, right, of course. Why didn't you say so? And so that is a helpful passage to be aware of. So that's Majjhima Nikaya Sutta 139. That's paragraph number 12. So I just thought I'd share that with you today. So any questions on that? I see Anagarika Paul's not here, but... Okay, well, we'll carry on with part 3 of this interview with Roger Wheeler. And so just to remind people, Roger is a monastic in the Tibetan tradition, American, and had been living in a Tibetan Buddhist center in Switzerland when he met Luang Por. And this interview is being carried out in 1981 at Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. So it starts off with Roger asking, I would like to return for a moment to the role of tradition. Do you feel that adherence to a particular tradition would naturally tend to separate one from another tradition that has a certain set of values? Luang Por responds, well, on the level of convention, everything is separate anyway. You are separate from me as a person, as a body. That can only be solved when we merge by developing wisdom. With conventional form, there's only separation. There will always be men and women and innumerable religious conventions. These are all on the level of sense perception, which is always discriminatory and separative. It cannot be otherwise. Yet, if one is mindful, those very conventions take one to the deathless, where we merge. There is no you or me there. To which Roger responds, deathless. Deathless? How do you use that term? Luang Por replies, it just means that which is never born and never dies. There is nothing more one can say, really, because words are birth and death. Could one say that the deathless is synonymous with the end of clinging and grasping? And Luang Por responds, non-attachment to mortal conditions. And one of the ways that Luang Por Chah used to define Nibbana, when he was asked that kind of question, what is Nibbana? He would respond, it's the reality of non-grasping. As Luang Por Chah's regular definition of Nibbana, it's the reality of non-grasping. So Roger Wheeler's response there is right in accord with what Luang Por Chah would say and what Luang Por Sumedho is saying. So Luang Por says it's non-attachment to mortal conditions. Then Roger asks, I find it more the rule than the exception that when belonging to a group, there is a tendency to feel secure and to condemn, belittle, or speak condescendingly to those who don't share one's own religious beliefs or philosophical dogmas. I was quite concerned about these matters when I left the centre in Switzerland. How does one overcome this feeling of separation, form versus essence? How can one be free from becoming enmeshed in form, whether it be in a study or a meditative environment? Luang Por responds, well, just be enlightened. It would solve all your problems. To which Roger says, thanks a lot. It's the second time in this dialogue that Luang Por has made that same point. But I feel the struggle that I think that Roger Wheeler had been having was that the emphasis on form and how keeping to the form is so often made synonymous with good practice, and obedience to the form equals practicing well in one's mind. And I certainly had that as my program when I was in Thailand, and then when I came to England. So I first joined the monastery early 1978 in Thailand, and I lived there till late 79. And then when I came to England, it was the first time I'd met Luang Por Sumedho at Chithurst in the early days of Chithurst Monastery. And I really had that in my mind, that the way you practice is you surrender to the form, and the more completely you surrender to the form, you're obedient to the form, then the closer to Nibbana you are. That equals good, synonymous with good practice. And it was really being in those first few months of being around Luang Por Sumedho and getting a sense of his perspective that I began to really see that and the way that Luang Por so skillfully related to form, and that it was very much a skillful means in his mind, and that just the obedience to the form or surrendering to the form, that if that's taken to be the practice, if that's taken to be synonymous with good practice, then you're losing sight of it as a skillful means. And I remember, I've told the story many times, how when in the early days of Chithurst there was some concern that the place wasn't going to be able to be registered as a monastery. We needed to have a change of usage from being a family home to a religious institution. And so we were having a traffic survey. The neighbours were saying that we generated a lot of traffic. So we used to keep careful track of all the cars that came and went every day. And one evening, I was on the evening stint of the traffic survey, and I was in the kitchen at Chithurst. And those of you who know Chithurst, the kitchen has a window that looks right out onto the little courtyard area to the north of the building. And so I was missing the evening meditation, the chanting and meditation. I was sitting in the kitchen with my clipboard and, to note down if any cars arrived. And then about 10 minutes into the sitting, quarter of an hour into the sitting, at about 8 o'clock, one of the novices just walked into the kitchen and said, "I'm fed up, I'm going to make a cup of tea." And I was completely aghast. It was like a totally unthinkable thing to do. Like, what? You're just fed up and you just left the meditation, you're putting the kettle on? What? You can't do that. That's outrageous. And I was very very sort of proper and obedient monk. And anyway, that was startling to me that someone would be so sort of easily and casually sort of going against the form. And then later on, a few weeks later, when the same novice, his conduct got more and more extravagant and was getting a bit more adventurous, going on sort of very long distance spindabarts to like Guildford or Portsmouth and such like, hitchhiking and so on. And then there were these times when I thought, oh, Luang Por's really going to let him. Well, he wasn't known as Luang Por Sumedho, then it was Ajahn. Ajahn really going to come down on him like a ton of bricks, or he's really going to get it, or whoa, I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. And then Luang Por basically treating him very comfortably with a lot of ease and respect, and wasn't sort of scolding him like the fierce headmaster. I thought, wow, but he's really misbehaved. He should be punished. He's not obeying the form. But it was really interesting and insightful that Luang Por just didn't come from a place of say a kind of automatic judgment, but he saw this person's got a lot of restless energy. They need a big field to wander around in. And it was a real lesson for me in how my mind had made it very clear that rigid adherence to the form, that equals the practice, and that Luang Por Sumedho was demonstrating that's part of the practice. But what's more important is being mindful of time and place and situation, and that the practice of Dhamma is bigger than the forms that we use to support that practice. And I really hadn't seen that. I had not got a sense of that at all until I was living with Luang Por Sumedho in England, that I hadn't really picked that up from the life in Thailand and at the International Forest Monastery, or the branches where I had lived. So that was really a very wonderful and powerful teaching that personally I got from those early days with Luang Por Sumedho. And another story I often tell is how during my first rains retreat as a bhikkhu there in England in 1980, I took this, I made this resolution, this adhitthana, to just have the meal and water, and not even hot water, just cold water, outside of the meal. And so, as a junior monk, junior monastic, you ask the permission of the teachers before you take on an austerity like that. So Luang Por Sumedho, he knew that I'd taken on this resolution for the period of the rains retreat. So we had an event that Luang Por was invited to. It was a dedication of the Peace Pagoda, actually, at Milton Keynes, when that was being launched. And he took me along as his attendant, and then an anagarika came with us. And then there was a sort of peace conference that they had with many different speakers and representatives from different traditions, not just Buddhist, but Christian and Native American people were there as well. It was a very colourful event. And so during an afternoon break, it was about 3:30, 4 o'clock, and this particular anagarika was very, very gifted at finding interesting allowables. So, and so that he was one with a specific skill in that area. And so it was about 3:30, 4 o'clock, that time of day when you could really use a bit of sugar or stimulation. And there were so many, many speeches at this conference. And so in this break, then the anagarika came up to Luang Por and had these two kind of toffee chews. and he offered both of them to Luang Por Sumedho, and said, these are allowable, Tanajan. And so then Ajahn Sumedho handed one to me, and I gave him this look that said, "But Tanajan, I've taken this vow to have nothing but water outside of the mealtime, and we're in the middle of the rains retreat." And he gave me this look that said, "Yes, I know." And he looked down at the toffee bar. He looked at me, and so I thought, well, he's the Ajahn, so I took it. And then he said, "Phew." That's a relief. I thought we had another Ajahn so-and-so, I won't mention the name, but that I thought we had another Ajahn such and such on our hands. So he was making a test, like, okay, you can keep the form and you can be obedient to it, but can you let go of that? And so, and then that was one of those sort of a transmission of the teaching outside the spoken word, well, included the spoken word, but it was very definitely, this is a teaching. And so that, and it was more important, it was important for him, in a way more important, that not just that I could use the form, but then when it was time to put it aside, that I could do that too. And so that, I feel this is a particular area where Luang Por Sumedho has had a lot of experience, a lot of skill, and has a very helpful perspective. So we just got to Luang Por encouraging him to be enlightened. Thanks a lot. Then Luang Por carries on. One has to make the best of all these things. Even here, at the Insight Meditation Society, the meditation is kind of spoon-fed. It's like sitting in a high chair and having your mother come along and dish it out to you on a little plate. It's idealistic. For meditators, there's hardly any friction. Everything is secure and provided. In places like Tarpa Churling, the Tibetan center in Switzerland, there's more friction, much more to forgive, much more confusion for the mind. Chithurst is a good example of being neither the best nor the worst place. It's adequate. Some people will make use of it, some will not. I don't want it to be too perfect or ideal, because people need friction. Otherwise they become complacent and dull. One has to give people space to work through their biases and hang-ups. In my own life, I saw how I became attached to the teacher, the tradition and the rules. If one is serious in watching dukkha, one begins to see that and let it go. That doesn't mean one has to throw away the tradition, it just means that one can be at ease with it. I enjoy monasticism. I like being a monk. I think it's a very lovely way to live as a human being. But if it doesn't work anymore, when the time comes to end it, it will end. That's it. It doesn't matter that much. But there's no need to throw away the monastic life either. I've grown because of it. I've not as yet seen a better way to live one's life, so I stay with this one until it's time to change. When the time for change comes, it'll have to come on its own. It's not up to me to decide, well, I'm fed up with this, I'm going to try something else. One can see the whole tenor of a monk's life is very good. It's harmless. It's honourable. It's useful in society too. I know how to use it. I can teach through this tradition. I can teach people how to use the tradition, which I think is a good thing to know how to use. One can learn how to use conventions instead of just rejecting them. If I give you a knife, you can use it for good or for ill. That isn't the knife. It isn't the knife that's the problem, is it? If you use it to murder me, would you say the knife is bad? The knife might be a very good knife, well made and a useful tool. It's the same with the Theravada or Tibetan tradition. It's learning how to use them skillfully, and that is up to you. One has to recognize that Asian teachers come from a society, Tibet for example, where everything is more or less taken for granted. They've been raised in a society that thinks and lives Buddhism. Whether they are devout or not doesn't make any difference. Nevertheless, it affects their whole outlook on themselves and the world. Whereas you come from a country which is materialistic, and whose values, based on greed and competition, and trust and faith in conceptual learning, have affected your mind. Our faith in America is in books, isn't it? In universities, in science, in conceptual learning, in being reasonable. Then Roger asks, do you find that type of learning to be invalid, or can that also be used properly? No, right. It's learning how to use things like that correctly, with wisdom. Nothing in the universe is a waste. It's all perfect. There's nothing in it that needs to be rejected or added. There's nothing wrong, really. One is looking for perfection, but it's in the imperfect where most people go wrong. If one is looking for perfection in a Buddhist teacher or a Buddhist tradition, one will be greatly disillusioned. If one looks for perfection in Krishnamurti or anyone else, or in the perfection of one's own body and the condition of one's mind, perfection isn't possible. One cannot force the mind to think only good thoughts or to be always compassionate and kind without giving rise to even an impulse of aversion or anger. The mind is like a mirror. It reflects. The wise person knows the reflections as reflections and not as self. Reflections don't harm the mirror at all. The mirror can reflect the filthiest conditions and not be dirtied by it. And the reflections change. They're not permanent. Filth and dirt also play an important part. Hatred and all the nasty things in one's mind are like manure. Manure stinks. It's not nice, and one isn't happy to be around it. Yet it does give a lot of good nourishment to the roots of plants so that they will have beautiful flowers. If one is able to look at manure and see it for what it is, rather than saying, ugh, get it out of here, I don't want anything to do with it, one can appreciate its value. Even hatred is Dhamma, teaching us that it's impermanent and not self. Everything takes us to the ultimate truth through seeing that whatever arises passes away. So even the dirtiest thought in one's mind is just that. It's merely that condition changing. If one doesn't resist or indulge it, it arises up from the void and goes back into the void. It's perfect. There's nothing that is wrong, and that is why there's nothing to fear. If one starts trying to think of ways to change the world so that it'll be perfect, one will become very bitter and disappointed. People get very upset when I say that because they think I'm not going to do anything. What needs to be done, I'm doing. What doesn't need to be done, I leave undone. Just this condition. One does good and refrains from doing evil. That's all I can be responsible for. I cannot make the world, or my concept of the world, anything other than it is. That concept of the world will change as we arouse wisdom within ourselves. We will then be able to look at the world as it is, rather than believe in the world as we think it is. The truth isn't Buddhist. It's not that Buddhists have any special insight into the truth. It's just that Buddhism is a way that works. So once again, Luang Por is sort of talking about his skillful use of convention, and also I think the impact of an idealistic Western mentality. And again, I think particularly because Roger Wheeler was an American and had been living and was living still in the Tibetan monastic tradition. And so coming from a sort of rationalistic and an idealistic perspective. So when you have idealism as the sort of centerpiece of your life, and in America, it's I lived there for a long time, and I have American citizenship too. I was born in this country, but spent a lot of time over there. It's almost explicitly an idealistic country because you have the declaration of your rights, of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's sort of, it's literally in writing. it's there. That's your right, and it's sort of carved into stone. It's there. So the impact of having a very idealistic perspective means that then over and over again things can't quite meet that ideal. They can't live up to that. So if you sit in here in the temple and you look at the Buddha image and you think, I should be able to sit like the Buddha image, and if I can't, then I'm a bad meditator, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad nun, bad anagarika, bad monk, bad anagarika, then you're creating a lot of badness. As the Buddha is an ideal, that's why we have a shrine with the form of the Buddha in the perfect posture, but it's an ideal. And so in what Luang Por's saying here, I feel, is that you do have the ideals to inform and to guide, but you start from where you are. You start from the actuality of this body, this mind, and this personality. And so that rather than thinking, I should be there, I should be like that image, and I'm not, therefore I'm failing, or I'm not good enough, or that person isn't like a Buddha, then that idealism becomes a very direct cause for suffering. But we use ideals and forms and conventions to help set a direction, but in terms of really practicing Dhamma, the actual the living practice of Dhamma itself is working with the way you are, the way this mind is. And again, as Luang Por is saying, that even if you have an ugly or an unskillful state of mind, it's perfect insofar as it arises and passes away. And in this era, one of the things that Luang Por Sumedho used to say over and over again, like many teachers, he would have a particular theme that he would repeat over and over for periods of time, for a few months or a couple of years. And during this same era, the early 80s, he would ask the question, what is it that Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know? And with the way he'd put the question, you'd think, oh, well, Buddhas, of course, they have this amazing psychic powers. They can see through all the different realms of existence. They can see the past, the future. They can read, beings' minds, and all the workings of karma are clear to the mind of a Buddha, and so on. So he'll say, what is it the Buddhas know that unenlightened beings don't know? And then he'd pause for a moment and say, all that arises passes away and is not self. And I don't know how many times over the years I heard him say that. So on one level, it's, oh my goodness, that's so simple. Yeah, that's the only difference between a Buddha and an ordinary person. And that's what he would keep pointing to, is that the practice of Dhamma, that it really comes down to that. Say a change of perspective and seeing things in that very clear and direct way, and also that's the one of the ways that stream entry is characterized in the teachings many times, and how the seeing of the deathless, when the mind awakens to the deathless. So, for example, when Venerable Sariputta met the Bhikkhu Asaji on his alms round, and then Venerable Asaji gave him a short teaching, and then right then and there, that the mind of the wanderer Sariputta realized the deathless. And what he realized was all that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. Yankinchi samudaya dhammang sabantang nirodha dhammanti. Or as like in the Dhammacakka Sutta, what the insight that arose in the mind of Venerable Kandanya when he's listening to the Buddha was exactly that he entered the stream, and entering the stream, seeing the Dhamma, awakening to the deathless, it's characterized by that. What goes up must come down. All that arises passes away. So it's extremely simple on one level, but it's a life-changing insight on another level. Similarly, the recognition of one's perceptions as such, and the way that the mind relates to things out of habit. And he uses this example of manure, and you say manure is stinking and it's not nice. You don't want to have it around. But if you're a fly, that's the happy day. If they really like to be around manure, it's like, oh, great. This is opportunities, food, delicious, great. So that what is revolting to a human is as attractive to a fly. And so that when you bring those kind of things to mind, you realize, oh, that wrongness or that badness is based on the way the mind is relating to it. That being the case, then what he says, that in the end of his comments in this section, he says, one does good and refrains from doing evil. So that's the framework in terms of action, so that having that recognition that everything belongs, the wholesome belongs, the unwholesome belongs, the beautiful and the ugly, but in terms of guidance for action, and this was, I think we were talking about this yesterday, I think with the question Philippe was asking, Is that's the guidance for action. Is you do good, you refrain from harm. That's the basic framework for conduct, and that the guidelines for living skillfully in many ways don't need to be a lot more complicated than that. And in a sense, our establishment of our lives around the Vinaya and the many and various aspects of the precepts of our Vinaya discipline, they're spelling out in detail, in very, very refined ways, how to do good and not do harm, how to live in a way that is modest and skillful, honest and harmless, and how to avoid living in a way that is indulgent or destructive or confusing or harmful. So any questions, comments? There's some microphones available. Yes, Venerable Nidaro.
Yeah, Ajahn, I had a question about that toffee incident with Luang Por Sumedho. The toffee,
yes.
The toffee incident. And how to practically relate to making determinations. Because my own sense is that if I make a determination, and like the one you made, for example, during that vasa, I would write it down. First, think about it very carefully. Can it actually be done? What are the boundaries? What can be learned from it? What am I trying to test and maybe develop? What skills or strengths? Think about it very carefully. Then write it down. Let it sit maybe 1 day, 2 days, and then sign it, and that fixes it. Mm-hmm. And there's no. I mean, it would be. I would perceive it as a kind of a failure to break it, and then of course one learns from that, and one can recover, and it's okay, right? But I would feel that having an attitude of flexibility around a determination that's made, to me, it's I don't know. It doesn't seem so helpful. I don't know if. I think precisely in the rigidity is where the value lies, because when one is really tempted, that's the only way one can stay within that. Otherwise, anything can be seen as, oh, well, we need to be flexible, so this time is okay, we'll have our chocolate or whatever. So I was just wondering what your recommendation would be about skillfully holding determinations.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it was particularly because there is the Ajahn that I'd taken dependence on him as a teacher, and also I greatly trusted him as a teacher, and that it was very clear he knew exactly what he was doing, and so I read it as a test, and so that the motivation to go outside of that resolution wasn't coming from me; it was coming from my teacher, and so that makes a difference, and so that I would say it makes a categorical difference. As with many things, with resolutions, you make those kind of determinations. One of the most important things is to be using the quality of wise reflection, vimamsa, like looking at the results of it. So if you make a resolution to carry out some practice like that for the rains retreat or for the winter retreat, such like, then you look closely at what are the effects as you are carrying it out, so day by day. What are the effects afterwards, when you've completed it? And then trying to be as honest and as straightforward with looking at those results as you can be. Also, check with your friends. Okay, I was keeping this resolution for the rains retreat, and if they say, "We know," and if you've been irritating everybody around you with this particular practice you've been doing, it's like, oh, so that sounds like it wasn't. That didn't sit very well with you. It's like, yeah, it was so annoying. Didn't you realize you were irritating everybody around you? Oh, really? Oh. I'm not saying that anything about you in particular, but that can be the case. Or it could be at the other end of the spectrum. Yeah, that was so inspiring. Yeah, that was really wonderful. It was really something that was very uplifting. So just getting feedback on what the results are of the things that you're doing, not just from an internal perspective, but also your friends, also from the teacher or teachers, your mentor or the Ajahn or wherever you're living, and saying, okay, well, I've been doing this practice, and I see it's got this and this and this benefit. It was a bit of a struggle because of this, that, and the other. So, can you give me any feedback on how it looked from your side, or do you think it's been helpful for me? So it's good to get that kind of a reading of the situation, so that you're able to skillfully apply those kind of disciplines, austerities, or whatever. Because it's easy to make resolutions and then stick to them, and you get kind of out of balance with them. That it becomes something that you get really obsessed by, and so takes over your life. And so out of a sincerity of fulfilling your commitment, that you made a particular determination, you can lose sight of the fact that you're getting late for things, or you're falling asleep in all the meditation because you're doing the siddhis practice, and that you're half asleep all the time, or that you've made a resolution to memorize the Sutta Nipata or something, and your mind's kind of completely obsessed with memorizing this text, and you're sort of forgetting the other duties that you have, or you're ignoring the other people around you, and so on. So it's good to be keeping things in perspective, and if you see that, oh, well, I made this resolution, I thought I had good intentions, but it's really causing more problems than it's bringing benefits. So I think it's more skillful to leave this aside, and so that it's good to chat with your whoever's your mentor, or the Ajahn of wherever you're living, and say, well, I had made this resolution. I was going to do this for the whole rains retreat, but this seems to be causing a lot of problems, and so I'm thinking of relinquishing it, and then get feedback from the teacher, because one of the Buddha's comments about the Dhutangas, in particular, the Dhutanga practices, is that the main purpose for them is to live simply, to learn to be adaptable. That's the purpose of it. It's not to burn up bad karma. It's not to try and impress the people around you. The main purpose, or the main value of practicing the Dhutangas is for the sake of simplicity, so that you can live in any situation. So if you're hungry, you're okay. If you're full, you're okay. If you're comfortable, you're okay. If you're uncomfortable, you're okay. If you're alert, you're okay. If you're sleepy, you're okay. So that's I would see, and from my own experience, I would say that's exactly it. That's the main value of those kind of austerities, or as a resolution, is to learn to be adaptable. If you've made a resolution to learn Pali language or to memorize a sutta or something, that's in a bit of a different category. But that's what I would say is that you look at the results of what you're doing, and that's what vimamsa is. Like in terms of the iddhipada, the 4 bases of success, the last one, vimamsa, is looking back at the results of what you've been doing. And in a way, that's almost like the most important one of the 4 iddhipada, because you can have a lot of forward-going motivation, like you're interested, you're putting energy into it, you've decided what you're going to do, but if you don't look at the results of what it is that you've been doing, it's easy for things to get out of balance. So that was a really helpful teaching to me, to be able to see how. There is the teacher. He knows I've made this resolution, and but he's also seeing I'm a one vasa monk. very keen and young, and I know he knows I can hold on, but can I let go? And that was that particular test. So okay, here's the Ajahn. I'll take the toffee and chew away. Any other questions, comments? Gaspar.
Thank you, Ajahn. So I think this is a very interesting topic, and I also am trying to draw parallels to adhering to certain principles or structures also in lay people's lives, which is something that I always seem to struggle with. Sometimes dealing with a situation, for example, where I might have made a promise to someone, or I have to go to a meeting, or there's a structure that I have sort of made a resolution to adhere to, and it includes other people, but this can be disrupted by a sudden emergence of another situation, for example, a fellow human being or something else, sort of relaying maybe, or opening up, or being just interested in a conversation, and then it's always the choice, should I focus on sort of being compassionate and present for this person right now? And then obviously the trade-off is, okay, I have to jeopardize first my own sort of punctuality, and then this will also influence other people. So it's kind of like a liminal space where I think applying skillful means and wisdom is sort of necessary. And just in preparation of the setup, of the video setup, I had a moment like that where I was like fixated on, I have to test the sound, while the person was sort of speaking to me about something humanly, and I was like totally disregarded that and focused on the goal. So I guess what I'm saying is, of course, the resolution with oneself is a sort of one aspect of it, but then there is a resolution, or sort of a resolution with oneself is a contract with ourselves, but we have also contractual obligations to others, and sometimes these can be disrupted. So I appreciate your comment on this. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. In a way, the simple answer is be mindful. It's rather like Luang Por saying to Roger Wheeler, be enlightened. Thanks a lot. But it really comes down to that. So like if you're in that kind of a situation where you're really torn, and you think, well, I've made a promise to do this, and then here's this person who's really having a struggle, or something else that's really attractive, and then I'd really like to do that instead. And that there's really no formula. I'd say that it's good to keep your promises where you can, but also that kind of, say, particularly issues of compassionate care, that someone's really needs your help. And you can't make a formula for it, but it's out of mindfulness. Often, what I find is that if you just say, I would really like to help you, but I've got this responsibility I have to take care of, and so I don't want to be unfriendly or unhelpful, but right now I've got 3 minutes to get to the temple, set up the microphone, and get things ready for the reading. So can we talk about this later? And then almost invariably, if you set things up in that way, then it's like the person will say, fine, yeah, sorry, yes, you go right ahead. And so I used to find it really difficult to do that. I would just find myself just continuing to be torn and go, ugh, and then feeling you're late for the other thing, or you have to write that off. And but stepping into it and saying, or it can be like, right now I really would like to hear your problem, but I'm absolutely exhausted. I remember when I was going to go on a sabbatical to India for a year. I was living in America. I'd been there for about 7 years, living at the Abhayagiri Monastery in America, and I was I came here to Amaravati. I was here for a couple of weeks before going off to India. So I was going to be out of circulation for a year, and there was a number of people that really wanted to talk to me about serious issues before I left. And so that last day that I was here, this was in June of 2004, and there was a constant stream, and one person, so it was already into the evening, had like a 3-hour session, and it only ended because they had to go to the bathroom. And there'd been like people all day long, and I was really glassy-eyed. And then I had that fatal thought, alone at last. And then, of course, 9:30 in the evening, knock, 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 someone came to my door and said, Ajahn, there's something I really need to talk to you about. And I said, I tend to have an open door policy, but right now I'm really exhausted. I've been talking to people all day long. I'm really fried, and I've got to go to India tomorrow. I'm away for a year, and I'm really sort of full to the brim. So, well, actually, I'm sorry, Ajahn, but this really is a serious issue, and it's it's an important philosophical issue because a very significant teacher, and I think that what you and Ajahn Sumedho is really incorrect, and I think we really need to talk about this. And I'm a pretty patient person. I mean, not boasting, but I consider myself to be quite patient. And I just said, yeah, you're joking. I've already said to you, I'm really exhausted. I've been talking to people all day long. My last conversation finished about 20 minutes ago, and that was 3 hours long. I haven't got any space for this. But Ajahn, no, it's an important issue. You talk about the knowing as some kind of transcendent quality, and that's just in terms of Abhidhamma, that's just not correct. And Ajahn Sumedho is the same. And I had to say, it's a long time ago now. So 2004 is 15 years ago, or more. But I said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I just don't have any space to take this in. And so I hear what you're saying, and I understand you're concerned about it, but this will have to wait till next year. And so sometimes that's the person that they were. I'm not making fun of them. They were serious. It was a serious concern. They were like quite upset that that particular point of Dhamma was really important to them, and they'd sort of, when Ajahn Amaro's free, then I'll talk to him. And I just have been with people all day long, for days and days and days, one meeting after another. And so, okay, he's free now. Knock, knock, knock. And so sometimes you just have to say, well, yes, I would like to be available, but my bottle is empty. But going back to the original question, it is important to keep promises and to be honourable, particularly if it's just something that is as attractive and interesting to you. And as you were speaking, I was reminded of when I was 17, I'd left home and gone to work in London, my sort of gap year between finishing school and going to university. And I worked at a big department store in the centre of London. And I was just walking out to a place to get some lunch, I think. And it was down Carnaby Street, which was just near where I was working. And the night before, I'd been at a concert by Mick Ronson, who was a guitarist of David Bowie, and he had his first solo concert. And I was at that concert the night before, and Mick Ronson walks down the street. And so I was, 17. I thought, wow, it's Mick. And I said, I said hello to him. I was at your gig last night, and so we chatted. And he said, "You're the first person ever to recognize me on the street." So, and then he said, "I'm just going to the recording studio. Would you like to come along and sit in and see and join me there? If you're welcome to come along and just see what happens in the recording studio." So, 17 years old, David Bowie's guitarist, come to the recording studio and listen in. However, I was the part of my rental agreement was babysitting, and the family that I rented a room in their house. They had these 3 small kids, and I was on babysitting duty that evening. So there I was in the middle of London, and Mick Ronson saying, come and join me for in the studio. So like an open door into the rock and roll universe at the age of 17. And then there's the promise I'd made to the family that mum and dad are going out. It's my job to look after the three little kids. And there's this moment. But I kept my promise. I said, well, I'd love to come along, but sorry, I've got something else I have to do. And so he said, oh, never mind. Maybe some other time. And that was it. So that was a memorable moment. But I felt, so part of me was disappointed, but part of me was really pleased. I felt very happy about having kept my promise, and because living in an honourable way is something that is, it's when we talk about punya, merit or blessings, one of the main causes of developing punya is living in a way that's honourable and honest, and keeping your promises, keeping your resolutions. That's what helps to sustain that kind of inner brightness. And when you break your promises, or you're casual, or you're kind of acting on impulse, then that dissipates that same energy, that sort of burns that same brightness gets spread out in a more wasteful way, and we kind of, in a way, lose those blessings. So we spend our blessings in a careless way, so that it has a great value to be as faithful, as honourable as you can, to keep your promises wherever possible, and if something comes up where you can't, then you say, you go and ask for forgiveness afterwards. I'm really sorry. I was supposed to set up the microphone. Somebody was having a crisis, and I just had to make a call, and so I thought, okay, well, someone else will have to do it. Or not. But right now, I can't leave this person, because that's the most important thing. And so you just, if you can't keep a promise, then go and apologize and say, please forgive me. And then if you let the person or the people know why you broke that, then it would be, then almost invariably they'll say, oh, well, that's fine, if it's for a good reason. Like if I'd gone to that family and said, sorry, I made you have to scrap your night out because I was invited to go to a recording studio with a rock and roll star, like they'd say, okay, get out. That would have been the end of my rental agreement, I think. And with good reason. So I think it's that principle is important to really take to heart. Any other questions? Can maybe just read a little bit more. This is Roger asking. You mentioned that the emphasis at Ajahn Chah's monastery is on maintaining the Vinaya, the monk's discipline. Do any of his monks study scripture? The Abhidhamma, for example. Does he find that necessary, or place any importance on study at all? Luang Por responds, the monks do study. There are up to 3 levels of governmental examinations for monks. Ajahn Chah encourages the monks to take these examinations, which require a basic intellectual understanding of the Dhamma and Vinaya. So he encourages the monks to do that much. Ajahn Chah will send those monks who have the inclination and aptitude to learn the Pali language to a special monastery where the language is taught. However, he does not go out of his way to encourage that, because he realizes it's not necessary to know Pali grammar in order to attain enlightenment. It's a very individual thing. One cannot make just one suit of clothes to fit everyone. However, the general pattern encouraged at the monastery is to develop one's mindfulness while living under the Vinaya discipline. And Roger asks, does Ajahn Chah expect his monks to teach at one point or another? Luang Por responds, when they're ready, he has them start teaching. Then most or all of the monks will one day teach? Luang Por responds, it also depends on the monk. Some monks cannot teach, that is, in a structured way. They just don't have that kind of ability. Some teach in other ways, just by their living example. So as I think it is understood within this community, it's certainly not expected that everyone who goes into robes is one day going to become a teacher in terms of giving Dhamma deathless. Some of my dear brothers and sisters quail at the very idea of giving a Dhamma talk. They'll be very happy to sit and chat and be available and give advice on a one-to-one basis, but the Dhamma seat is almost like radioactive, like kind of some kind of chemistry of being in the position of a Dhamma teacher that just is really off-putting. And so you work with people's aptitudes, and as he says, sometimes it's just the way that people teach is just by how they are. The teaching is not verbal, but more as an embodiment of particular qualities of composure or kindness or practicality, of being all ready to help out and lend a hand. So like say Ajahn Tha hardly utters a word, at least in English, but he is incredibly creative in terms of various amenities around all the hand sanitizer dispensers. He made me a torch in the shape of an Aladdin's lamp. It's just out of the blue, like he just offered it to me, a beautifully crafted wooden lamp, like an Aladdin's lamp with a light in it, an LED light that you can recharge through a USB port. It's like, wow! But he hardly, so he teaches, but his teaching is through his readiness to offer things and to see what's needed and to lend it and to sort of teach with his hands and his ingenuity. So there's many ways that we support each other and guide each other and work as examples for each other. So then Roger is speaking. You said earlier that you had many difficulties when you were at Wat Pah Pong. What were they? Of course, in the beginning, you couldn't speak the language at all. I'm sure that was a big one. And Ajahn Sumedho responds, well, it was a strange culture and language. In that situation, one has to give up practically everything that one is accustomed to in one's own life. How did you deal with that? I just did it, actually. I don't quite know how to say how I dealt with it. If one wanted to stay and learn from that place, one just did what one had to do. I managed to change my ways to adapt to their ways. The Thai monks were always very kind. It was not a place where people made things difficult for one. There was always generosity and kindness. It was just getting used to doing things in different ways, eating strange food and speaking a different language. And Roger asks, yeah, sometimes when people from two different cultures meet, a kind of cultural arrogance may arise on one side or the other, or both. Did you encounter this? And Paul responds, well, yes, like anyone else, the Thai people have feelings about their culture and society. However, we all shared living in common in a monastery, where the emphasis is not on cultural inheritance, but rather on the Buddha's teaching. So the cultural differences didn't seem to be of any great significance to anyone. I was much more sophisticated than they were. I travelled a great deal, lived in different places, and knew much more about the world in general. Their superiority to me was in their ability to live so well and to coordinate in the only tradition that they knew. I often felt very clumsy and foolish, like a very oafish person, because I didn't tend to have the physical coordination or agility in bodily action that they had. So frequently people would comment to Luang Por that his way of sweeping leaves or his way of walking or all kinds of things. So, you shouldn't do it like that. Well, Ajahn Sumedho, why do you do it like that? Or, Luang Por Chah doesn't walk like that. And such like. And So that's very common for us as Westerners, and that when the first branch monastery I went to in Roy Et, the Ajahn was building a new sala, and so I thought, oh well, I can help out with the building work. And he gave me a hammer and a nail, and he said, knock the nail into the post there. And he just watched, and I thought I did quite a good job of knocking the nail in. And he said, go to your kuti, meditate. So obviously my hammering skills were not sufficiently fluid, or he could see that it was pretty clumsy and clunky, and so he said, better you go and meditate. So maybe I'll just finish this chapter today. So then Roger says, we were talking the other day about traditions and routines and how a complacent attitude may arise towards one's practice. There's often a tendency for a young monk to be very strict about his vows and to keep a strict discipline. Later one finds one isn't really digging in or doing the practice seriously. One tends to become mechanical in one's actions. Maybe the will to discover the truth becomes stifled by the weight of the organization or the tradition. Did you find that kind of degeneration at Wat Pah Pong? So then Luang Por responds, well, I didn't find it for myself because I had plenty of motivation on my own. And I didn't let any tradition stop me. But I could see that some monks were not very motivated. They were in it just because it's their tradition. Therefore they tended to sink into habitual living as a monk. Ajahn Chah is quite an expert at pushing people out of ruts, but he cannot keep doing that all the time. One cannot expect him to play nursemaid to all the monks. I think he did that very much at first. I've noticed that he now takes it all much more easily and leaves it pretty much up to the monk to develop. That's the way it should be. This is a very mature practice. The teacher should not be constantly called on to prod and arouse the students. We should do that ourselves. But there are Thai and Western monks who just seem to sink into habits. They would do that wherever they were. They don't have that urgency in their lives. To which Roger says, I think you're poking fun at me. I don't know why. I don't know why he would feel that, but he says, I think you're poking fun at me. Krishnamurti says, the guru's role is to point out, finished, then let the person learn. If he inquires, he will find out. But if you tell him everything, then you're treating him just like a child. There's no meaning to it. Right, Luang Por says, right. Also, bearing in mind that Luang Por Chah was about 62 at that point, when he was still teaching, and this was 1981. He was 62, going on 63, so he was younger than I am at that point. So I'll leave it there for today.